Great, so thanks again to everybody for joining today's knowledge share. Today we're going to be talking about rodenticides or rat poison or rat bait used on campuses. So it's going to be a really good sort of collaborative opportunity to talk about what we're doing on our campuses relating to rodenticide use and its impacts on wildlife, and see whether we can come up with a bit of an action plan together for how to take these conversations forwards. We've got a few case studies from a couple of universities to share with you as well. So just a few bits to get out of the way. First of all, we've got a hashtag hedgehog friendly campus. If you would like to post on social media with that. We're also on social at hog friendly, so do give us a tag if there's anything interesting that you've learned from today that you'd like to share. We're funded by the British Hedgehog Preservation Society, or BHPS, so a big thank you to them for the funding for the programme. And Hedgehog Friendly Campus is now delivered by Students Organising for Sustainability UK, another charity that does lots to raise awareness and educate staff and students on the climate and biodiversity crisis. So the aim for today, so for our rodenticides on campus knowledge share, is to really help everybody to understand a bit more about how our current relationship with rats and rodents on campus might be harming other wildlife, and to share some knowledge between campuses, whether that's a university, a college or a school. We hope to start on a bit of an action plan for you as well, a bit of a shared action plan. So we're hoping that we'll have something a bit firm that you can take away and start to plan having conversations with your university, college or school staff about the impacts of these kinds of poisons on our wildlife. Today's session is actually a companion to a conference that we ran last year. So it is a bit of a follow-up. Don't worry if you've not seen that conference, you can watch it after the fact. There's a little QR code on the side of the screen there. So if you want to scan that with your phone, or you can just search on our YouTube channel. So our Hedgehog Friendly Campus YouTube channel for Coexisting with Rats conference. So if you're interested and you've got some time spare after this, then you can go in and have a look. That's the aim for today. So we've got a number of really interesting speakers that have come along today, and you'll be hearing from all of them in due course. And that includes Kevin Newell, founder of Humane Wildlife Solutions. Kevin's going to be talking to us about ways that you can manage rodents on your campus without the need for poisons. Kevin's spoken to our groups before, so you may have heard him speak. So we'll be really looking forward to Kevin speaking in a few minutes' time. We've also got two case studies. So we've got a case study from the University of Edinburgh. We'll be hearing from Elizabeth, who is going to be talking to us about the university's research that's been ongoing with relation to pest control, and a pilot pest control project that's been going on at the University of Edinburgh as well. So it's hopefully something we can learn from them. And then towards the end of the session today, we'll also be hearing from Civi. So Civi's from Kingston University. Thank you, Civi, for joining us. And Civi's going to be talking to us about a programme that's ongoing at Kingston University to reduce the number of rat bait boxes on campus. So again, a really, really fascinating case study, and hopefully we can use as a good knowledge share there. So good range of speakers. There'll also be lots of opportunity for discussion and questions as well. So just a little bit of housekeeping. As you're aware, this session's being recorded. Use the chat box for questions if you have them, please. We've got Bethany joining us from SOS UK, who's supporting the questions in the chat box. So please do use the chat box if you've got questions or comments. We do hope that you will feel confident enough to engage in some of the discussions that we'll be having today. We're not expecting you to be really knowledgeable on this topic. It's really just a way for us to share a bit of knowledge, gain some opinions, find out how things work on your campus, hopefully put a bit of a plan in for the future. So do engage in the discussions, whether that's through the chat box or unmuting the mic. I should say the speakers' views that we've got today are not necessarily the views of ourselves here at Hedgehog Friendly Campus or the British Hedgehog Preservation Society. That being said, please be very kind, considerate and understanding of everyone's opinions, whether that's the speakers or the guests today. We will be closing this conference, this knowledge share event at 2 p.m. So hopefully you're settled in and comfortable, because it's one that's perhaps a little longer than usual. We've got a few speakers to get through today, and we're hoping to have lots of time for discussion as well. So we'll also be using Slido today to ask you some questions, hopefully get a bit of the conversation going. So Slido is an online polling system. So a little similar to using whiteboards, but there is an extra step to it. So for those of you that have used Slido before, it's going to make sense. For those of you that haven't, I'm just going to explain how to do that for you now. So Slido for polls is really quite simple. We're going to ask you, and here's an example, we're going to ask you a question. So it might be something like, which university, school or college are you joining us from today? So we'll get started with an example, a nice easy one. Hopefully you'll all know the answer to this one. And the way to submit your answer on a Slido poll is simply either to go to slido.com in a separate tab and put in that reference code that you can see on the left-hand side. So the one that starts with a hash. So slido.com and then put in that reference code. Or if you have a smartphone, you can scan the QR code, which is this black box at the bottom here. So scan that QR code with your smartphone camera, and that should take you direct to the poll itself. So hopefully, and I'd like you to have a go at doing this now, please, so that we can just have a little test with it. So it'll give you the opportunity to type in your answer. So whether you're scanning the QR code with your phone, which I'm doing now just to check that it's working, or whether you're going to slido.com in a separate tab and putting in that reference number. So you'll see when that opens up that you have the opportunity to answer this question. So you can type in where you're joining us from and then send your answer. So I can see in the top corner, we've got lots of people submitting answers, which is great. I'll just give it a minute or two. So when we come to polls and we're asking questions, we give you a couple of minutes to submit an answer. And just so that we've got everybody, so we've reflected everybody's input and everybody's answers there. If anybody's having any problems with Slido, pop it in the chat, Bethany will help you out. But hopefully that's nice and simple for you. It's my first time using Slido for an event, so hopefully I've explained that well. I find it quite useful, Slido, it's quite fun. So I can see we've got a good number of responses in that top corner there. I'm just going to give it another minute so that we can find out where you're all joining us from. So another minute for you to submit your answer to this poll on here. So there'll be a few of these as we go. And thanks, Bethany, for putting the link to Slido in the chat box. Oh, that's really useful. Okay, you can see we're coming to slowing down with responses, so fantastic. Right, we'll leave this poll here then. Hopefully you've all had a chance to submit an answer there. So, oh wow, whoa, brilliant. Huge range of locations that joined us today. Got a few representatives from Greenwich and Lancaster, which is nice to see. Hi everyone. The Open University, the University of Edinburgh, Pembrokeshire, Royal Agricultural University. We've got some colleges with us. Derby College, welcome. National Star, welcome. The Sheffield College as well. So really lovely to see a big mix of teams and universities that have joined us today. So I believe, as far as I can see, you're all, let me just see if there is anybody on here that's not part of the Hedgehog Friendly campaign. I think you're all part of the Hedgehog Friendly campaign, which is great. So hopefully that's how you learned about today's event. And there'll be some useful information you can take away with you to support with your Hedgehog Friendly campaigns as well. So brilliant, well done. We all figured out how to use Slido. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Right, so the reason for today's event is because we all love hedgehogs, right? So we are a part of Hedgehog Friendly Campus because we're trying to enhance our habitat and make it safer for hedgehogs and other wildlife. But the overarching reason, you know, the kind of reason why even hedgehogs are important is because of the current climate and ecological emergency that's happening across the world. Here in the UK, our biodiversity is very much at risk. In the UK, we're one of the world's most nature depleted countries. We're actually in the bottom 10% globally for biodiversity, which is quite scary. And there are a number of reasons for this: climate change, intensive agriculture, unsustainable use of resources, and continuous ongoing development and sprawl. So all of these things are having big impacts on our wildlife, our biodiversity, and contributing to the ecological emergency. Species and beloved species like the hedgehog are included in this. Hedgehogs are now actually on the red list here in the UK. So a little bit of a sort of symbolic really of that ecological emergency. So we are concerned for our wildlife. And Hedgehog Friendly Campus was born of that idea really. So hedgehog friendly campuses, I'm sure you all know, are there to do three things: protect wildlife from harm and from hazards, to enhance habitats on campus and in the surrounding area, to help animals like hedgehogs thrive, but also to educate staff, students, and the local community about the solutions to wildlife decline. So it's quite an empowering programme in that sense. And if any of you aren't involved, or I think you are, if any of you aren't involved and you would like to be, there's more information on the programme, Hedgehog Friendly Campus, at www.hedgehogfriendlycampus.co.uk. And Bethany, if you could pop that link in the chat, that'd be really useful. So today's knowledge share is really to focus in on one particular hazard, sort of one particular issue, and that is the use of rodenticides or rat bait on campuses. So the knowledge share for today hopefully will help you to understand what the issue is with rodenticides and their impacts on wildlife, but also to arm you with some knowledge and maybe even some terminology to take these conversations forwards with staff and students on your campus. You'll have the opportunity to learn from what other teams have done, from our case studies and our discussions, and we'll also be able to create something of an action plan for your campuses. So based on the feedback and answers that we're getting from yourselves as part of our polls, we'll be able to share some learning from other teams that you can take away with you to really start moving on rodenticides and poison use on campuses as part of a campaign for your Hedgehog Friendly Campus programme, or just as a sort of wider part of the university or college's policies. So that's the plan for today. So just to get us started, and before we hand over to Kevin, so your talk's coming right up, we have a Slido poll for you. So a nice, hopefully simple one to get us started. Hopefully you remember what you're doing from the last Slido poll. You can go to slido.com or you can scan that QR code. And we just want to know from you, have you ever discussed or tried to discuss use of rodenticides or rat poisons with staff before? So really simple yes or no answer here. So we want to kind of gauge the sort of level that our teams are at with this. You know, is this your first volley into rodenticide use, or have you tried to discuss this with staff or students on your campus before? So if you can get on Slido, give us a vote. They are anonymous, so just a yes or no, and there'll be no judgment whatever your answer. This just helps us to know kind of what level you're at, really. So I'll give you a minute. I'll just give you a minute or so. You can see the responses ticking up on the right-hand side there. So just one last final minute to answer this first official poll. Have you ever discussed or tried to discuss use of rodenticides with staff before on your campus? Okay, so I can see some people haven't had the chance to vote yet. Just wondering if maybe that's because it's some of them are the speakers. So I think we'll just leave it there then. 24 responses, that's great. So thank you very much for completing that first poll. Oh, that's interesting. So we've got the results just on the screen for you here. So around 50% either way, slightly more no than yes. So hopefully today then will kind of be the catalyst for you starting to have these conversations, or at least feeling more confident in that process, really. So that's really interesting. Thank you very much for we've had just a final vote there, taking us a little bit further up over on the no responses there. So about 56% of you have never discussed rodenticide use with staff before. But interestingly, about 44% of you have. So I guess that's, yeah, to those that vote no, hopefully by the end of this session, you'll feel more confident in doing so. For those of you that said yes, hopefully you've got some learning that you can share with the teams that have joined us today. Where's my cursor gone? It keeps disappearing. There we go. So fantastic. So over to Kevin Newell, who's joined us from Humane Wildlife Solutions today. Kevin is going to be talking to us about the future of wildlife control on campuses. And as I said, Kevin has spoken at one of our previous events. So it's really nice to have you back, Kevin. Are you there? Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I'm here, Joe. Thanks for having us. And just one thing is, I would love to know, with 44% who have had those discussions with staff about rodenticides, how those discussions went. That's the first thing that sprung to mind there.
Absolutely, that's a really, really good good point. It's a good question, and maybe what we could do is after your talk, we can have a little chat about that.
I'd love to do that. That'd be brilliant.
So, do you want to go ahead and share your screen?
Yeah, and let's get this going. Let me know when you can see that. Okay, is that all right? Fantastic. Okay, well, hello to everyone. It's amazing to see so many people from so many different universities across the UK, all taking part in these really, really important conversations. So I'll just get cracking on with my one. So who am I? I'm Kevin Newell. I'm the founder and owner of Humane Wildlife Solutions. This is our 10th year that we've been operating. We go under the guise of a pest control company, but we are like no other pest control company you've ever found. For starters, I don't see any wildlife species as a pest. To me, they're all wildlife, individual creatures that live amongst our human populations. And what makes us so different is I spend a lot of time getting to know the psychology and the behavior of a multitude of species all across the world. You know, we don't just operate in Scotland. I'm based in Glasgow. I cover the whole of the UK. I travel to Europe to help people, and I do global consultations where people need it. And the species I've done have been wolves in Canada, monkeys in South Africa, skunks in America, right down to mice in Italy, and the good old, what we're talking about today, rats and other rodents all across the UK. What makes us different to other pest control companies is that we are experts at finding solutions so they don't keep on coming back and causing issues. And we do all this without poison, without kill traps, without harming any species. So, you know, over the last 10 years, I've really perfected these techniques to the point now that we look after some of the biggest high street stores, shops across the country, and have hundreds under our belt that we look for, because they've seen it works over that time. So this work we've been doing won multiple awards now, because people are starting to see that what we're doing is changing the pest control industry. You know, it's not just helping animals, it's environmentally friendly, it's an ethical alternative to pest control. And like I said, I work with all sorts of species. It can be ants to moths to wasps to deer to moles, you name it, we will work with it if we have to. Even spiders, we've done a job down in Essex for spiders, which was a fun one to do for a commercial client. But what I'm trying to portray here is that no matter what species you're having troubles with, especially our rats, there is always a non-lethal solution. You just need to ask, and you can find what that solution is. And if there isn't one out there, then I set to work finding one. So rats, I absolutely love rats. Sadly, people see them in a negative way. I'll go into them a little bit more in my next slide, but I think they're amazing, amazing creatures, and they're so intelligent. Every time I work with rats, I know I'm going to be in for a very, very tough day, but I'm very clued up on rats, on their behavior and their signs and their psychology, that although it's tough, I can read them like reading a book, and that enables me to help solve problems with rats quite easily. So rats have always been given a hard time. When we all grow up and we get read nursery stories about rats, you know, the Pied Piper leading the plague of rats into the river. They talk about the Black Plague being spread by rats, although that theory, thankfully, is now changing ever so slightly. But if you look at any program which has rats, and they're always portrayed as being bad and evil, and I think that's wrong. You know, I've worked with so many rats, hundreds, if not thousands of rats over the last decade and even longer. I've even helped rehabilitate rats which needed care. And you get to see what amazing creatures they are. And one of the things we need to understand about rats is, you know, they share our living spaces. So they share our, like your uni campuses, they share our homes. You know, I'm in central Glasgow here, and there are rats around. And it's fine for them to be around because that's where they live and that's where they thrive. And us as humans have created these environments which these rats have adapted to, which I think is amazing, that they can survive alongside us. And now the key is they're fine to be outside, living on the railway lines, in our parks, in just small green spaces. But we never really want them in our homes. So that's what we'll look at is how you can make sure they don't get into homes. And more importantly for today's talk is how you make sure they don't get into university buildings. Because if you stop them getting into buildings, then that takes away so many risks and fears that facilities teams at these universities may have, and may be their main driver to try and control rats on the campus sites. Now, when you talk about rats, like I say, people always see them in the bad light. If anyone's ever had a pet rat, an animal companion rat, you'll understand just how intelligent and clever and caring and hygienic and clean they are. And I'll be honest, when I do my work, when I'm working with mice are really mucky. When I'm working with rats, they're so clean. They're very hygienic creatures, unlike our little rats, mice, sorry, who are not so clean. So just a bit of food for thought there. So for those who have been exposed to rats, even if it is companion rats, you'll understand just how socially intelligent and complex their little lives are. They're such fantastic mammals that we share, not just our urban, but our rural areas with. So rats in our buildings. If you get to the point you've got rats in buildings, it's always a tough and tricky job to try and figure out. So for these examples, I'll relate to a university campus. They can cause troubles when they're in our buildings, and that can be, you know, chewing wires, chewing pipes, although it's not always something they will do. Not every case I've come across has been a result of chewed wires, but it does happen. I have seen it. So that would make us understand why we wouldn't want them in there in the first place. So if you have rats coming into a campus building, you know, taking knee-jerk reactions and the uni's putting down maybe bait boxes or snap traps, it's not good. And the reason why it's not good, and I'll give you a couple of reasons. So if you put poisons down inside a building for rats, yeah, it may kill them. Depending where you are in the country, that there is a very high level of resistance to rodenticides now in the rat population. So in some cases, it's not going to harm the population at all. The ones that do die will then die in the walls, in the ceilings, under the floors of these buildings, and it's going to smell and it's going to cause a health hazard. So poisons, you know, are they really effective? I don't think so. So another thing I always find odd about rodenticides, they're made to be attractive to rats. So this is where they draw the rats in. So you may just have one or two rats visiting a building, and other rats will be drawn in by the rodenticide, and then you've got more rats coming in. And the key thing about this, and this is something I would encourage anyone to ask or have these conversations with your universities, is if they're using rodenticides, ask them this. This is why I get around, or making people who are not so rat friendly or wildlife friendly understand that rodenticides don't work. First question I say is, how long you had your rodenticides down? one conversation I had with a supermarket manager, they had it down for 6 years. And I said, okay, so you had rodenticides down for 6 years. Do you still have rats? His first answer was yes. So what does that tell you straight away? It says that rodenticides are not working in that situation. In fact, what happened in that situation is by putting rodenticides down and more every few months was actually attracting more rats in. All they needed to do was figure out how those rats are getting in, and then they could solve the problem. And we helped them solve that problem right enough. And it's the same with snap traps. You know, the poisons and the snap traps may kill rats, and no one wants to see that. It's not pleasant, especially with such amazing mammals that are coming in. So with these rats, you don't want to be having to see that, because if you have a female rat coming in and she's got young somewhere and she's killed, those young are most likely going to die, and that shouldn't be happening. And plus, with these traps, they may kill rats, but it's simply repopulating those rats naturally in those colonies, unless you work on preventing them getting in there. So my bullet points here, you know, for rats in our buildings, these are the few things you really need to understand, is how have they gained entry into the building? Usually it's going to be one or two places. You don't usually have multiple entry points. Rats are creatures of habit, so they will stick to the same entry points and runs that they use. And the more they use them, the more likely more rats will follow, because those runs will smell of rat. And that to another rat is an invitation to go and follow that path and see where it goes. So you really need to try and understand, you know, where they've gained their entry from. When they're in the building, the next thing we do is try to assess just what their range is within that building. It could just be under the floor in one room where they're coming in through a broken vent. It could just be going up to the attic space or the roof space and traveling down the wall and back out again. So understanding what they're doing in the building is really important as well. So what is their range within a building? And then you need to understand is, are they living in the building or just visiting? So let's say someone's got a wildlife garden outside one of the campus buildings and they're feeding the birds there. Now, these rats have then got into the building. Now, are they living in there to have a nest site as close to that food source as possible, because that's what rats will want to do? Or are they simply just coming in on the off chance because they've been drawn there by the bird food? And again, these are really important questions. And this is kind of the process I go through when I'm trying to help people with rat issues. And then you need to understand again what has attracted them inside. If they're just visiting, they'll just be coming transient, so in and out, no typical pattern. But if there's something inside that's drawn them in, and that could be a food source, let's say, for example, there's a cafeteria or canteen and it's not particularly secure against rodent intrusion, that could draw rats into a building. So taking action to stop rats getting in the first place is so key. And like I said earlier, if you're able to prevent rats getting in buildings in the first place by protecting the outside of the buildings, and it can take time, and it can be a big job, but once you secure a building and that rats can no longer get in, that's that building secure for years to come. Now, what does this mean? It means the rats will be outside. And like I said earlier, that's absolutely fine. They're a part of our natural ecosystems. They're allowed to be there. And I feel it's almost a little bit of tolerance we need to bring into the picture here, that we assume for us to allow them to be there. That's their natural environment. They should be able to exist there without any persecution. As long as they don't get into our buildings, then that's fine. So that's a really good thing to take away here, is maybe asking your universities, you know, secure their buildings and allow rats to stay there. They won't breed out of control. They're not going to cause loads of major problems. As long as they've just got a natural food source, they'll limit their own population sizes themselves. So our approach to rat control, we've developed our techniques over the last 10 years, and they change all the time. So we don't just go out and help people solve problems, but I also research into ways that I can advance what we do every year. And for example, this year, we're running a big project with Aberdeen University and Glasgow University up here in Glasgow on ways to work with gulls, which nest on rooftops. So, you know, we do collaborations, and we work and we research new methods, and we're always updating the way we work with wildlife to make it better for the wildlife, better for the people who have the conflict, and for everyone involved, I guess, at the end of the day. So with a building, like I say, it's all about securing that external entry points, I guess. So making sure nothing can get in from the outside is your first port of call. Mapping the activity, and if they're in certain parts of buildings, it's containing them there. And once you contain them to a small area, you can then put in exclusion methods. And one of the new things we've been using in the last year are rat flaps. So typically it's like a cat flap, but made for rats, made by an amazing American company who make all these wonderful little trap designs. And these rat traps that will basically allow, if there's a rat in a building, it will allow the rat to go out the trap and not get back in again. So it's just like a one-way door for a rat. And it's a good way to get them out. Removal, live trapping is always good, but there's so many different factors you need to consider first before you can live trap. We do have a fantastic live trapping guide. So if you are live trapping on your sites for removing rats, let me know. We had a zoologist called Flo Blackburn from Aberdeen Uni design this fantastic guide, and it's probably one of the most in-depth guides to live trapping of rodents in a humane way, and covers every aspect of when you've caught them, how to set the trap, what you use to set the trap, where to put the trap, right down to release sites. So it considers every welfare aspect of a rat or a mouse from the very beginning of even before you trapped them to where you release them at the end. So that's really important, is if you are live trapping, is to be considering the welfare of the animal at every stage, you know, the time they're in there, what bait you're using to trap them in, you know, whether that's going to hydrate them enough before you release them. So I touched on it a little bit earlier about why rodenticides didn't work. This graphic here is from a Dutch university, as you can see at the bottom of the slide there, by KAD, the Centre for Urban Pest Expertise. And they did surveys, and this was using live video feeds of different species that visit the bait box. Now this is, pay attention to this because it's really, really important for university campuses. If you have bait boxes on your campus, you're probably just thinking there's going to be maybe rats or mice going in there, and it's not really going to affect other species. But you can see from this graphic just how many different species went into these bait boxes. Now, when rodenticides are used, they're only legally allowed to catch rats and house mice. So when you look at this, shrews, voles, wood mice, birds, all that is technically illegal. You're not allowed to poison these species. They are protected from poisoning. If you were to say to AFA or DEFRA or local councils that you're going to put poison down because you want to get rid of wood mice or voles or shrews, you wouldn't be able to do that. That would be completely illegal. So we need to understand that these bait boxes don't just attract rats and mice, into a whole array of other wildlife goes in it, including hedgehogs. In fact, just last week I was sent a photo of a hedgehog which had been caught in a bait station which had a snap trap in it. It was just a juvenile hedgehog. They were taken to the vet, and the irony of this story that the bait station was at a vet's car park in the first place, which blows my mind that a vet would have traps in there on their grounds, but it caught a hedgehog. Luckily, little hedgehog was fine. Had a checkup in the vets. I think since then they've removed it because they can see how awful these things are, catching even juvenile hedgehogs. And that hedgehog luckily was released back into the wild. But just one more thing about this graphic. If we're talking hedgehogs on campuses and you want to attract them in there, 658 slugs and snails were found going into bait boxes. Now you consider that slugs will be eaten by hedgehogs. If these slugs are eaten into the rodenticides, that's going to be going up the food chain. You know, and hedgehogs will take small mammals and even birds if they get the chance. So we're seeing all these different species visiting the bait box. It's not just rats and mice that are at risk. It's not just hedgehogs. It's all these species, and that will go through the food chain. So that's something really, really important to consider. And like I say, if you go and try and find that study, if you can't find it, get in touch and I'll find the link. I've got it somewhere. I'm happy to share it because I think this is a very key point in raising with your university to say, this is why we don't think rodenticides should be on our campus, because it's not just rats. These are other protected species which are being harmed. And that does sadly include hedgehogs. So how can universities reduce rodenticide? So first of all, ask your university, for the unis, do they survey for wildlife living on campuses? I know Elizabeth from Edinburgh University was showing me some of her tracks that she's set out to see what mammals they've got going in there, and seeing the badger print was amazing. Ask the universities to secure the buildings and remove external attractions, so rodents are not being brought in close to buildings, because if they're not seeing rodents or rodents are not living there, they don't have a need to then put the rodenticides down. But so to come back to the surveys, the reason why that's really important, because if you identify there's other species around these bait boxes, then that should be the first port of call where the university should be lifting those bait boxes straight away. A good example was here in Glasgow, in one of the local parks, they were putting poison down for what they thought was rats, and it turned out to be water voles, and they were poisoning the water voles until I stepped in, and they ended up removing the poison and just had to go back to scientists tasking people not to feed the birds at this pond. But no one should be putting poisons out on their campuses unless they know what other species are there. So what can you as students do? Ask your university to review the pest control methods and rodenticide use on campus. Ask them to speak to us. We'll happily work with universities, no matter where you are in the world, to move away from rodenticide use. I can show you all the different methods and techniques you can use. So you can bring me into the conversations with your universities. If you're finding that the unis are not willing to talk, set up a group to campaign for change. I've seen it happen many, many times. Students are so fantastic at setting up little campaigns, little groups to try and force a change. And if you've got that passion to drive that change forward, it can make a huge difference. You can literally rescape the campus that you're going to study on for the better of wildlife. And no one, and this is probably the very obvious one for this chat, is ask your uni to sign up to hedgehog-friendly campuses. And if you really want to give them some more food for thought, find these studies. There's lots of studies out there about the effects of rodenticides on non-target species. I would send them to your whoever's in control of the rodenticide use on your campus and say, look, here's the evidence. We think this should stop. You've got to do better. And after all, remember, we are in a climate and a wildlife crisis at the moment. So we all need to be doing everything we can. And that includes on our campuses, on our homes, everywhere in our communities, for our wildlife and for our climate. So that's my talk. If you have any questions, please do just fire away. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Fantastic, thank you, Kevin. It was lovely to hear you speak again. What a shame to hear that story about the hedgehog, the baby hedgehog caught in the snap trap. Is that something? What happened? What happened after that? Did they decide to make any changes?
As far as I understand, that the vets removed the. I've asked the pest control company to remove the bait boxes with the snap traps in, and like I said in the talk, it's just absolutely balmy to think that a vet, which you would think would have a lot of compassion and care for animals, to be allowing these bait boxes on, and it just shows you how ingrained it is in society that we automatically need bait boxes outside, and this is going to be affecting all sorts of species. And that young hedgehog was so lucky that someone was passing by and was actually heard the hedgehog scream, and actually got the photo of the hedgehog hanging out upside down with his foot caught. And the irony is it's caught at a vet, so the vet was able to get the box open, get the hedgehog released, and luckily there was no harm caused on that occasion. But that's a example of this could be happening on university campuses around the UK, your campuses, for the people listening. So you can affect that change to make sure things like this don't happen again.
So we've got quite a few questions in the chat box actually, which I'm keen to just get to. Bethany, are there any in the chat box? Are you able to read some questions out for Kevin?
Sure. Yeah. Eliza was asking, what is the name of the American rat trap that you used?
It doesn't actually have a name. It's from a company called Tomahawk. Tomahawk traps in America. If you would like to see a link, if you just either message Joe at the end of this or drop me a message, and I'll happily dig it out. It's on my reference. details and I'll send it over. They do a whole array of different kind of flats, traps, you name it. It's really cutting edge stuff, and it's really good to see someone doing this because it gives even lethal controllers the option not to be lethal when it comes to any kind of wildlife control.
Okay. Thanks, Kevin. Were there any other questions, Bethany?
I'm just reading through some paragraphs right now. Not many questions, just a lot of people saying that they'd like to be forearmed with a lot of info before they tackle pest control contractors and things like that about rat bait boxes.
Yeah, I mean, you'll find that with bait boxes and pest control contracts, a lot of universities will probably have them, and you'll find that some of these companies will be willing to listen and talk and change. You know, just because they've got those contracts, it doesn't mean they can't change the way they're doing it. And to be honest, if a lethal company wants to keep the contract and they fully want that, that's fully understandable. But getting a lethal company to use non-lethal methods is a huge win, even bigger than drawing me in, because you're then changing the minds of those who are just thinking put poisons, put traps and kill. If you start planting that seed into these lethal control companies that it actually works and they use it and they can see it works, that has a much wider impact, because then they'll take that back and use that other sites that they're doing, not just campuses. So the reach from reaching these lethal companies is huge.
Thanks, Kevin. And I think you had a question, Kevin, didn't you, for the guests that have joined us today? You were interested in knowing, for those that have had these conversations or have approached staff at their campuses about reducing rodenticide use, how did those conversations go?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, so if anyone here who answered that poll, I think it's 44% of you answered that you have had the discussions. If anyone would want to unmute and just tell us how the conversation went, that'd be really, really interesting to hear how you get on. So if anyone would like to share how they got on with their campus, please come forward.
Yeah, definitely. So I would encourage you to unmute if that's what you'd like to do, or if you know how to raise a hand, down towards the bottom of the screen there should be a little reactions button that should allow you to put your hand up, and then we can come to you. So then we might have a few people willing to give their to share their knowledge, being that this is a knowledge share event. And Bethany, if you can help me keep an eye on the hands up function, I can only see half of the attendees. So I guess the question really from Kevin and myself is, how did those conversations go? Were they positive conversations? You know, did they go anywhere? Is it an ongoing thing? You know, that kind of thing. We've got a comment from Beck Elton in the chat. We've asked the question regarding rodenticides and herbicides as well. That's good. Usually we come up against, yes, we use them, but never give any information about what they use or how much of it, which I think is a good point to make. You know, we probably need to be establishing those kinds of things at a fairly early stage so that we know what kind of situation our campuses are in.
Yeah, totally, Rebecca. That's probably a reply I would expect from most universities. You know, pest control is a very taboo subject. A lot of people don't want to speak about it, but keep asking those questions. If that's the university you go to, Rebecca, you have every right to know what they're putting on the site and how much of it. So I would go back to them and say, you're really concerned about it. You know, be a bit forceful. It's okay to ask questions. And at the end of the day, the worst they can do is just keep saying no. But then if that's the case, there's nothing stopping you going around your campus and logging how many bait boxes you find. And then you can make an estimate from there of how much they're putting down. And you can challenge these things. You know, at the end of the day, when you go to a university, you're paying to go there to learn. You have a say in what happens on that campus. And if they do come back with, oh, yes, we used them, you can push it and say, look, we don't think you should be using them. And that's when you bring in, you know, ourselves and Joe, so we can say, look, we can have these conversations with you, with the university, to say, do you realize what effect this is having on the wildlife on your campus? and then try to get them to have that conversation. As soon as you get them at the table and you can give them as much information like you'll glean from this whole chat today, you can really start to make changes. And you just need that one time to sit down and convey the points you need them to understand. And like I said, give them a study, show them that one from the Netherlands where how many different species go into those bait boxes. And they can't deny that because it's research, it's another university's evidence and research. And that, I think, is the way going forward. So even though they come back to you, reckon, and not giving you much of an answer, don't give up, keep pushing on. And like I say, if you'd like my help in that, I'm more than happy to lend my voice to that.
Thank you, Kevin. We've had a few, they're not questions, we've had a few comments in the chat box. Just concern for time, I'm going to just move on. So maybe this will, Kevin, if there's anything in the chat box you want to respond to, please do. You can always follow up. We can always follow up afterwards. But just to inspire perhaps a little bit of further discussion before we move on to, is that the right one? Hang about. Yes, it is. Before we move on to our next talk, we've got a Slido poll for you. Let me. So some of you may have had these conversations with staff. Some of you may have had these conversations with other colleagues. You may have had these conversations with perhaps students. So really that's the basis of this poll, of this question. So regardless of whether you've actually taken steps to have these conversations, who do you think you could speak to about reducing rodenticides on your campus? This is going to be different depending on who you are, where you've joined us from, whether you've joined from a college or a school or a university. And there's no right or wrong answer to this. We're talking about trying to influence people, trying to change minds. So what's really, I suppose the question is, what kind of stakeholders do you think would need to be involved in these conversations? So influential groups, decision makers, staff, students, particular student groups, particular staff members. And as I said, we'll have a range of responses here because it will really depend on where you're joining us from. But from your perspective, who do you think you should be getting involved in these conversations? So again, we're using Slido here, so you can go to slido.com and put that reference in, or you can scan the QR code. And we'd be really, really keen to get your thoughts on this to help us build up that action plan. So remember, we'll be sharing these responses after the session, so that perhaps we can take some tips away to start leading on these conversations. So please do put an answer in here. Who could you speak to about reducing rodenticides used on the campus? Who could that be? What groups? What people? What stakeholders? You can see we're getting a few. We're getting some answers dripping through. We've had about 13 or so. So please do put your answer to this poll up on Slido. We'll give it another minute and then we'll move on. And hopefully, that might help you to start thinking about the conversations that you could be having too. Lovely. Right, I think we're slowing down with responses. So just give it one more second. Time pressure. Fantastic. Right, lovely, thank you. So a real range of responses here, if you can see them on the screen here. So we've got some that are very specific to individual campuses. Presumably Green Lancaster is Lancaster University. We've got senior management, absolutely. I think senior management's a really, really important voice in this conversation, and that's where you start. But it could be students as well. It could be conservation departments, or it could be conservation societies. I think, as Kevin said, students can be a really big push for these sorts of campaigns. Health and safety teams, absolutely, they would need to be involved in these conversations, most likely. Pest control teams as well, or pest control contractors, the governors. We've got a huge range, and hopefully that stimulated some ideas for you. If that's something, a conversation you want to take forwards, some ideas of types of people, stakeholders you'd want to get involved in those conversations. So thank you very much for your input on that. And that's really useful. And as I said, it's something that we can pass on to everybody and use that as a little bit of stepping stone. So we're going to just move swiftly on now to our second talk of the day today. We've got two Elizabeths that have joined us from Edinburgh. So Elizabeth Vandermeer and Elizabeth Garduza. We're going to be talking about wildlife management practices at Edinburgh and a little bit about rat bait boxes, the impacts that they have. And particularly what's quite interesting about this is a review of some research that's been going on over at Edinburgh, which I was very keen to see the results of. So Elizabeth, can you hear me? Are you okay? Are you there? Can you share?
Hi, yes, I'll just share my screen now.
Fantastic.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Okay.
Just check that that's sharing okay.
Is that sharing okay?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
Oh, great. Okay, I'll just go to slideshow. Okay, great, thank you. We'll just be presenting work that we've done to review our wildlife management practices and this has been over the past, I'd say the past year really. But Elizabeth has just joined me more recently as a volunteer. Thank you so much. I think you'll see that there's a lot of overlap with what Kevin has said. Thank you, Kevin. And we've already met with Kevin, and he's been hugely valuable in kind of making those connections with non-lethal practices and also kind of engaging with pest control companies that the university uses. So it's been a fantastic relationship so far. But first, Elizabeth, did you want to introduce yourself and then I'll introduce myself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. I'm so excited to be here. My name is Elizabeth Garduza. I'm from Mexico, and I'm currently studying the MI Design for Change at the University of Edinburgh. And I'm just volunteering this. For me, it's very passionate that we're making these actions in the university towards having like a hedgehog-friendly campus and try not to see wildlife animals as pests and try just to preserve all the wildlife that we have.
Yes, yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, Elizabeth's work has been really valuable, invaluable for our, our practices going forward. So I'm Elizabeth Vandermeer. I work for the university in sustainability, the sustainability unit for social responsibility and sustainability department. And I specifically focus on climate resilience and biodiversity. So I've led on the past 2 years on a hedgehog friendly campus campaign with students and other staff. And we had a really good discussion, I think it was last year, about herbicides that got us going on this. But let me go to, so in terms of the presentation, this is just a quick overview. I'll kind of go through our wildlife management projects and why we're doing it, and that leads into our biodiversity strategy. And then I'll hand over to Elizabeth to discuss rat bait box design. So that this was research that Elizabeth did to look at how accessible they are for hedgehogs, and if there are any that are potentially better despite the use of the poisons inside. Is there a better bait box? But then I also undertook some research on the side, just gathering. It was really collating existing research on the impact of rat bait boxes in terms of non-target species, but then also in terms of animal welfare. So as Kevin was saying, really considering rats not as pests, but as sentient beings that deserve our ethical consideration. And then I'll finally conclude with our trial development. So we're looking at 2 sites, King's Buildings and Pollock Halls, which is an accommodation site, and how we could do things differently there. So how did we start this? Why did we start this practices review? Well, and what does it involve? So we were, again, like I said, we started with discussion of herbicides because of Hedgehog Friendly Campus Campaign, and that kind of broadened out to consider, okay, where else does our estates team think that we have issues with plants and animals on campuses? And then also Joe kind of contacted us and said, could you have a look at rat bait boxes and their design? So that started that bit. And then we're also looking at seagull management at accommodation sites, again, glyphosate use, and deer and woodland areas, because we identified pockets of woodland in Edinburgh that we didn't realize the university had. And in some cases, deer are overgrazing, so we're considering how to address that. what I think is really exciting is we have this green infrastructure mapping program already, and this maps our campus sites. But what we want to do is also show areas that estates thinks are problematic in terms of animals considered pests, and also in terms of weeding, etc. But I think this visualization will be really useful for us to find potential problem areas, or expose that maybe they're not. Maybe it's just this thought that there will be a problem, but there actually isn't, as Kevin has already mentioned too. So all of this work is part of our biodiversity strategy and plan, so trying to address the biodiversity crisis. And this is our vision, to protect existing biodiversity on campuses, enhance opportunities for biodiversity, taking a holistic approach. And we're prioritizing our interactions with wider communities of organisms, including humans. So that means we're looking at how are we managing our relationships with plants and animals, and what is that relationship like, and do we need to change it? The biodiversity strategy presents a whole institution approach, so that's across our research, learning and teaching, operations, partnership, working, so it's very broad. And we have 3 strands: geodiversity, species mapping, biophilia, and placemaking. And Hedgehog Friendly Campus Campaign sits more within those last 2 areas. So I'll hand over to you, Elizabeth, and just let me know when you need a slide changed, because I'm not sure if you can do that. So
yeah, thank you. Okay, so part of the research was to make an analysis and a chart regarding the rate bait box design that is currently sold through the UK. So based on the hedgehog general measurements that we can find here, can we just change the slide, please? We came up with this chart, like I say. So we have different places, they have these different models of rate bait boxes, but we came up with the conclusion that they have general standardized designs, especially in the entrance. So that's it's very attractive for hedgehogs just to enter these boxes, because sometimes they have like inner rat traps, they have inner compartments. The entrance is very straightforward. And we came up with the conclusion as well that the rate bait boxes are just pretty straightforward. They're just there to, how can I say, like to attract the animal. It doesn't matter if it's rat or just a non-target species, and just poison them. So the design that it has, it looks like a haven, so to speak, in the wild. So it's very, very easy to a hedgehog, and we're not talking just about we're talking about mice. It's very related to the chart that Kevin showed us in his speeches, in his speak, which was talking about snails and other identified mice, and as well as hedgehogs. We came up, can we just change the slide? Yeah, we of all the analysis, we stumbled across this amicus box that provides a much better design than most other bait boxes, because instead of just being on the ground, this box just it's just I would say it's placed in the wall, so it just attracts, so to speak, the rats to climb over the box to eat the bait and then go under. So they try to avoid non-target species such as it says slugs and snails. Even though in the research that they didn't include for instance, hedgehogs that have similar similar behaviors and measurements such as rats. But at the same time, we conclude that even though this type of design it could be better, it's still just this criticize the use of bait, because even though it is not reaching the other non-target species, it just makes the rats just to be spreading around the poison, so to speak. So can we have the other slide? Just forgot about that. Yeah, so the conclusion that we have here is that the rats can still spread the poison to non-target species, even with the use of this type of boxes. So it is labeled as foolproof for other species to enter it, but we have to be looking forward that it's not just that make them enter, so they just take out the feature of being like a haven even though they don't have like the compartment or the traps, but it's still the use of the pesticide of this poison. It is something that is very harmful.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Thank you. No, that was such useful research, especially to find the amicus bait box for us. And I mean, as you say, there are these other serious issues that we have to consider, you know, instead of just plopping down amicus bait boxes. So yeah, so actually this leads really well on to something we've been considering. So these 7 principles of wildlife management, and you know, if we do that, you know, would we actually turn to the amicus box? So the 7 principles of wildlife management were developed by 20 experts in 2015. They're from academia, industry, NGOs, and they were looking to develop international principles for ethical decision making in wildlife control. So for them, it's about evidence, the specific, the local focus, which Kevin has already highlighted. So really, and again, Kevin's examples just kind of exemplify this approach. So, you know, you modify human practices when possible, you justify the need for control, you have clear and achievable outcome-based objectives, cause the least harm to animals, consider community values and scientific information, include long-term systematic management and base control on specifics of the situation. And the last one is really about what Kevin said in terms of not just thinking, oh, you know, we have an accommodation site, oh, we're definitely going to have a rat problem, and then just throwing down these rat bait boxes. And that's kind of what it looks like at Pollock Halls. So it's challenging that, oh, you know, we're going to have a pest problem in this location. So it's looking at the locality and the specifics of a site. And I've included a link there if you wanted to look at that further, and also sign up to the principles, because that's what we're planning to do. So if you're using these 7 principles, you're going to look, as we've already talked about, look at the impact of rat bait box anticoagulants on non-target species, and you're also going to look at animal welfare for rats. So we wanted to become more familiar through this review with anticoagulants, because that is what is primarily used in these rat bait boxes, certainly on our campuses. So here's just a little bit of background on anticoagulants, and this could be useful for you as well going forward, and engaging with the states teams or whoever you need to on your campus. So anticoagulants are used around the world. They act slowly, and this is what is seen as the benefit, because the rat doesn't get sick right there at the bait box, so it doesn't identify the bait box with a danger. They go away and they die 4 to 9 hours later, so they don't know how they got sick. Second generation anticoagulants are much stronger than the first generation ones, and we have the second generation ones in our bait boxes, according to our pest control people. So that's more lethal to the target animal, but also more lethal to non-target species. And even the British Pest Control Association is stating concern about these poisons in ecosystems. That's partly why they're promoting this amicus box. So we also, as part of our review, looked at specific studies, and so I've collated some here, and these could be useful as well for you to look at. So as I said, rats die anywhere from 4 to 9 days after poisoning, and they can be eaten before they die or after they die by predators. So you've got, you know, domestic cats, foxes, birds of prey specifically, owls and others. And as has already been mentioned by Kevin and by Elizabeth, you know, there are other non-target animals that could be poisoned, you know, other rodents. So one study that was undertaken specifically looked at barn owls, and so they fed them these rats that had eaten the bait. It was a second generation bait or poison, and they were showing symptoms of poisoning within a couple of days of eating these rats. So it was quite quick, actually, surprisingly, because it was a second generation poison. Then another study looked at secondary poisoning in predators and scavengers, and they saw a decline in these species, and they also saw a decline in local populations of wood mice and voles in areas where there was routine control with first generation poisons. And then another study found residues in non-target small animals around rat bait boxes. So they weren't quite clear the mechanism there. And they also pointed out the risk of secondary poisoning of predators. But as has been mentioned, and the BCPA has noted that slugs and snails will eat rodenticide blocks, and then they are in turn eaten by hedgehogs, slowworms, and other wildlife like other rodents. So there's a huge amount of research out there that you can draw from to argue, look, we shouldn't be doing this. So if we take our particular site, so Paula calls accommodation in King's Buildings campus, which is academic buildings, both sites are really near wild areas with diverse wildlife. So it's not just what's on campus, but what travels through, so Paula calls is right near Arthur's Seat. King's Buildings, there's some rural fields, and as Kevin mentioned, we found out a couple weeks ago that we have badgers at King's Buildings. So we're not sure. The set could well be on our campus. I'm not quite sure. But if you consider both these sites, specifically, I think Paula calls, you would, I'm sure, have impacts if this bait is being eaten by the rats. You'll have impacts on birds of prey around there, and there are many. So this is just a list of some that you would see, including owls and badgers at King's Buildings and corvids may eat parts of poison rats, and local dogs and cats are at risk as well. And at both sites, you'll see poisonings of small mammals, including wood mice and voles, potentially. And hedgehogs would be affected. We know we have hedgehogs at Pollock, so they could be affected by transmission from slugs and snails. But beyond that, beyond the focus on non-target species, we should care, especially if we're following the 7 principles of wildlife management, we should care about brown rats themselves. And Kevin has given you a great introduction to brown rats, and I love rats too. I don't have pet rats, but I've read a lot of research around rats, and a really interesting study by Panksepp on tickling rats, and rats love to be tickled. And this is something that we share, well, some people share with some rats. So there are, so that's a study you should really look at. But there's been a lot of research around lab settings in rats and trying to improve animal welfare. So that's where we're kind of understanding how intelligent, how sentient these animals are. And they're the same rats, they're brown rats, they're the same ones that you see out and about. So there was a study by Baker and colleagues in 2022. This is a really recent one that you could reference, that found anticoagulants alongside glue traps to have the greatest welfare impact. So they lead to the most drawn out and inhumane death compared to other methods. And here's a really interesting study highlighting a welfare paradox in countries such as the UK. So basically saying that, okay, there's the welfare of rodents in research or rodents kept as companion animals is subject to regulation and some community expectations, at least in the UK and in other European countries and beyond. But there's the lack of this similar regulation and societal regard for welfare of free living rodent populations, especially obviously when they're labeled pests. So that's a really important point to make. And this is just one final point about animal welfare concerns. There has actually been research done to try to counter so say an animal is poisoned, to try to make that poisoning less awful. So like adding different kinds of like analgesics or anti-seizure medications, which lessens the impact. Even though the animal's going to die, they don't die such a horrible death. So Beausoleil and Meller have used this 5 domains model, looking at if it's possible, for instance, with anticoagulants, to reduce impact to a degree where it's it's okay. And the conclusion is no. because of the quality, intensity, and duration of the impacts on the bodies of and mental states of the rats. So anticoagulants are considered one of the least humane methods to use, full stop. So finally, just getting to say a bit more about trial development. So obviously this review, this kind of collation of research, Elizabeth's research on rat bait boxes is now going to feed into our trial and what we do at these two sites, King's Buildings and Pollock Halls. King's Buildings is managed by City of Edinburgh Council Pest Control, and Pollock Halls is managed by a private company, so they're separate, but we're going to bring them together. And we just had a really good meeting, Kevin, I can't remember if it was last week or the week before, but with Kevin and Mark, who's from City of Edinburgh Council, and it was, I thought it was an excellent meeting, and I was really glad to have Kevin there to introduce, you know, his perspective. And I think we're moving in a direction where we're initially talking about putting down these amicus boxes, but I think we're definitely wanting to go further than that. What we want to do is first understand if there is an actual problem, you know, and where it is and why. As Kevin was saying, kind of this mapping exercise. Do further species surveys. We have done some, but I think we need to do more. And I'm hoping we can work more with Kevin to consider approaches, you know, what are we going to do in terms of a non-lethal method rather than putting down these bait boxes. And I've listed some, but I mean, Kevin knows much more. So, but these are some things that we would consider. And I thought the last one was really interesting, encouraging natural predators such as owls with nest boxes near problem areas. So we are early days. We're going to have a site visit in a couple of weeks, but we've been building up to this for the past year, I'd say. And I'm really happy to share any resources I have with people. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and Elizabeth for that talk. It's really interesting to see what's been happening, and within such a fairly short space of time, I think these conversations have developed. So I'm sure we'll all be interested to see what comes of these conversations and of this research. I can't see any questions in the chat box, Bethany, can you? Okay, which is probably a good thing because we are a little bit low on time. So if there are any questions, put them in the chat box. Hopefully Elizabeth can answer them within the chat box. Would that be all right with you both? Lovely. And if you can just stop sharing your screen there as well, that would be quite useful. So we've got one. Thank you so much, that's brilliant. We've got a little Slido question for you, if I can find it, before we move on to our last talk of the day. So actually this relates, if I can get it to work, there we go. This relates quite strongly to the discussion that that Elizabeth was just having with us. So again, same process, scan the QR code or go to that website. So there are lots of different ways that you can start to introduce this conversation with staff and students at your university. It might be because you're concerned about hedgehogs. It might be that you're concerned about animal welfare. It could be cost implications. It could be health and safety. But let us know what you think. What would be your starter? How would you go about approaching this topic with staff or students at your university or college? So there are some examples in the Slido for you there, but you may have your own. And I think animal welfare and the welfare of the rats themselves is something that perhaps often gets forgotten. So I was glad to see it mentioned, to hear it mentioned. So let's have your ideas. I can see 8 of you typing. So we'll have these in quickly so we can move on and give Sylvia enough time for the talk. So let's have just 30 seconds for your ideas here. So it could just be one word or a term. Looks like 3 typing, so we'll just give it 10 more seconds. Okay, we're going to come to a close. We're going to wrap this one up. Lovely. Okay, so Oh, great. Lots of suggestions on here. Remember, we'll be sharing these. So these will be conversation starters for you. Biodiversity review or biodiversity action plan, safety of humans and animals, animal welfare, culture change, talking about alternatives, definitely. Just asking how many, establishing those early questions. These are all really good starter topics to be having with staff and students. Probably staff, but yeah, animal welfare, glad to see that got a few votes on there as well. So thank you very much for your poll here. And Sivi, are you there? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can. I'll just start sharing my slides.
Let me just start sharing. So yeah, just welcome Sivi. Sivi's spoken at a few of our conferences before, so thank you for coming again. Sivi's going to be talking about the work that Kingston University have been doing to reduce rodent bait stations on campus. It's really fascinating, and hopefully we've given you enough time to get through your slides there, Sivi. Apologies for that. So let me stop sharing.
Not to worry. I think I'm going to, because we are limited on time and I want people to be able to ask questions as well, definitely give me time warnings. But I might, what's the word? I might have to adjust this on the fly because there's lots of information that's already been covered by both Kevin and Elizabeth. So rather than trying to go over that again, I am, let's see what I do. So first of all, thank you very much for having me here. I am Sivi Sivanasan. I am the Biodiversity and Landscape Manager at Kingston University. And just for context, I'm based within the Estates Department. Can people hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
Great. Sorry, just checking. And I'm based within the Estates Department at the university. So just because people will be based in different places, just so that you're aware. So I'm going to skip over legislation because I know these slides will be shared. There's notes, etc. in there. People will be aware that there is a legislative requirement when it comes to pest species, but a lot of that is to do with actually reducing the risk of transmitting disease. So all the information that both Elizabeth and Kevin have shared about actually if you can stop animals coming into your building in the first place, that's the key message to get through to people. But we have been using bait boxes, not necessarily as, well, there's two ways you can use bait boxes. One is to deploy rodenticides, but the other one, which was how our company was using them on our site, was to actually monitor rodents on site, monitor what's coming in to eat food bait. So it's not actually rodenticide, it's a food bait within the same mechanism that you would use to deploy rodenticides. Their argument is that by monitoring what we have around our buildings, we know what's there and to then try and stop issues coming in where they can cause disease issues. But first of all, from a disease point of view, it's not just rodents that cause disease. Our domestic pets can as well. You know, one of the reasons we're not supposed to have cats and dogs in kitchens, etc. So as Kevin was saying, rats and mice and other rodents get a really bad reputation in the press. And a lot of the press comes from rodent companies who are, building up business, hence those reminders. But let's just quickly go through here. So Elizabeth has already talked about actually everyone's already talked about the negative impacts of external stations which have rodenticide on non-target animals and how they can go up the food chain. And so just based on that background, just a little bit about what we were doing. Before we joined Hedgehog Friendly Campus, just in my role, I had been reporting issues around bait stations where there were bait stations in odd locations. We were seeing quite a few bait stations in some areas. There were no labeling. So for those who have worked with bait stations, there is actually a requirement to label the station to say what it's being used for. Is it a food, just monitoring? Is it a rodenticide, etc.? And what's being used in it? There is actually a legal requirement, I believe. And we were finding stations which had no labels on them, or the labels were blank. So I had reported these issues to the university, to the contractor to resolve, or the contract manager. And then we joined Hedgehog Friendly Campus in 2020. some of the issues I've been reporting were spring 2020. By October 2020, I was still raising the issues about labeling, the number of traps on our site, and I'd started asking those questions about, can we remove excessive traps, or excessive boxes, I should say, because they just seem to be far more than needed. And on the specific site I've been reporting these issues, we have a river going through our site, and some of the boxes, possibly old boxes, were on the riverbank and not by the building. So this is one of the reasons I kept raising this. If we go along the timeline, by January 2021, in the hedgehog-friendly campus campaign, in the silver category, they started introducing the topic about pest control. So as well as reporting issues, I used that, because I'd signed us up for hedgehog-friendly campus, as another extra lever to talk about bait boxes, where they were and how many there were. And this work led us to do because it wasn't just associated with one of our campuses, we have 5 campuses associated with our university. Even though they had removed some of the extra bait boxes on the campus with the river, I wanted to find out what was happening on other campuses, just because of these issues. I was fairly certain it was not isolated to one campus. So we decided to do a case study at Kingston Hill. This is our campus at Kingston Hill. This area, which is sort of like a red outline that goes around the whole campus, that's a woodland. It is a grade 1 borough woodland, a site of interest for nature conservation, listed in the council. There's lots of wildlife within that part of the area, and also because of the vicinity that crosses into our main built up areas. And these are some of the species that we have, and we know this because we do wildlife surveys through observation. So as listed, pretty much everything that can go into a bait station is on our site. And we're also lucky enough to have species such as badgers and foxes. We don't have hedgehogs, unfortunately, but we do have tawny owls. We have other birds, which would be birds that would eat slugs and snails. We have amphibians such as toads and frogs. We also have smooth newts as well. We also have all the neighborhood cats who come in to hunt the mice, but that means that they will also be impacted if rodenticides are being used. So what we want to do is look at a common sense approach on the areas that we control of the campus, on what was actually happening. We wanted to know what was the purpose of the bait stations being there, how were they being used, what was the reason for their particular locations, were they fulfilling the function for the reason for them being there, or was actually they were just gathering data for no reason? What were the chances of false positives? So by having external bait stations, even with food, my issue is that's attracting animals towards it. But if the animals aren't getting into the building, what's the point of a bait station being in that location? And also, what other actions could be taken if we wanted to remove the bait stations? It should be noted that by 2021, the pest control companies we were using, they had confirmed that there was no active rodenticides in any of these external bait stations. They were food blocks only. So that is just that's a good thing. But again, if you look at this image up here, you'll see all these blue dots and actually some of the red dots and yellow dots. Those are all bait stations across our site. So we did the audit. I was right in my thinking that we had far more than we actually needed. We actually ground treated. We went around the whole of the campus with the pest control team, and we walked the whole area, and I was basically saying, is there a reason there's a box there? There is no window, there is no pipework going down there, there is no food canteen, etc. Where would an animal go if it came to this box, and was attracted to this box? By going through our process, we actually removed 20 of the bait stations, and the plan below shows you the locations where they currently are. And so we moved all the unnecessary ones, and where we still have monitoring stations, they are around our kitchen premises where we have possibly sanitary pipework, etc., where there's been issues in the past. And again, it's only monitoring. But we were going down this process because, again, we don't want to attract animals into locations where it's not needed. We're trying to reduce the amount of bait boxes around. And then, but because we do have, from a health and safety point of view, there is still concerns about not monitoring externally to the building in some of these key locations. We're still monitoring externally, but not with rodenticide. It's visual checks and also what's going to the box. But what we're trying to do, and the company we've been working with has been very open to it, is we've been working towards more going around our buildings. Sorry, just checking the time, we might be going around our buildings and switching more to basically prioritize management and and maintenance, and stopping animals getting in. So if you did have a problem and animals were getting in, actually it's interesting to find out the non-lethal methods, but internal traps with either a lethal or non-lethal method is better than an external trap, because then you're only targeting the animals that are getting in. And actually it'd be good to know all the non-lethal versions that we can use should we have a problem. But the main thing really in terms of engaging people and trying to start this conversation, because if let's see, we can come back to that in a second, come back to that in a, okay. Just to give you an idea, so we managed to reduce the number of external boxes, and because we were going through a pest control contract tender with the new company, we've actually managed on a lot of our campuses to remove all external boxes. This is food boxes only, but all external boxes. And we're switching more to visual checks, having the contractor come on site, prioritizing maintenance, reporting any points where animals could get in and there's damage. Sorry, Joe, I may have missed the 5-minute mark on the chat. But I wanted to show you this timeline, because from the point that I started reporting issues to the point where we are now, removing external bait boxes and prioritizing different methods of pest control, it's been about 2 years. And it can take that long, because in a university setting, things work slowly. You have to go through process. If you want it to be a sustained change, it can take this long. So that's something to bear in mind. I'm within the estates team. I work closely with the maintenance team in our site. And therefore, I already had a lot of those relationships to start that conversation. And in my role, because it's biodiversity and I'm an ecologist, I have the excuse to ask those questions, and they expect those sorts of questions from me. But for yourselves, when you're just starting out, going back in terms of where to start out, if you don't have a friendly ear or you don't know anyone within the estates team or your maintenance team, try and make those connections first. Find out what the strategy is, because until I found out that actually we were using those boxes as food block boxes, my concern was every single one was filled with, rodenticide, and it's affecting all the wildlife that I survey on the sites, including, rats as well, but all the wildlife I survey on the site. So I kind of went in quite strong, but actually that wasn't the case. So I would suggest when you're starting those dialogues, find out what the strategy is, find out how they're using it. And you might not get to the right person straight away, because I don't know what your universities are like, but my one is quite siloed. If we're being completely honest, all the different departments don't necessarily know what the other department's doing. Sometimes there is this collaboration between certain individuals, but sometimes the academic side may not know what the maintenance side is doing, because they're doing very different functions within the organization, and they're quite big organizations. So when you're first starting out, I would recommend asking the question, try and find out who the contract manager is for the pest control strategy, because it may not be in-house. Find out if it's to do with the grounds maintenance, because it may not be. We have a different grounds maintenance contractors and we have a different company for pest control. See who it might be. Do you have somebody who is a biodiversity person or a sustainability person within either the estates team or the maintenance team who you can approach to ask these, to start these conversations with? Find out how they're using the bait boxes, and then see what can be done in terms of, is change needed? If it is, how can it be changed? Can you give them extra information which they may not have had? But it's always best to try and find out what the ground, what's actually happening in your organization, rather than assuming that what's happening somewhere else is also happening at your organization. Because if you go in all guns blazing and you get somebody on the wrong day, you could actually end up shutting down a conversation before it actually starts. Because if you're making an assumption and then going to somebody, and actually you may not know that their speciality is, for example, I'm an amphibian specialist. I've had numerous people tell me the ponds need topping up tap water. They're too dry, and they're not. This is an example, but they're actually not, but they don't know that about me. So they've come in with all these, so it's just to give you guys some tips on how to engage with people in other departments who you may not actually normally engage with, to try and help this dialogue go through, and know that it can take a long time. In terms, really far over. I'm a bit of a cynic. I don't think we'll ever get to a point of zero pest control, because us as a species, we all know we're the biggest pest on the planet. And we're not necessarily the best at keeping our environments clean. We destroy environments, we reduce habitat that other species can go into, and therefore they are, they're coming towards us. So it's just something to bear in mind in terms of being realistic about what we can achieve, and see if there's other routes through. If our campus is attracting lots of animals and we don't want them there, then what's attracting them in? Try and resolve those issues. I'm going to stop talking now and sharing, just because I'm fairly certain I've gone over. I was trying not to go over, but I think I have gone over a fair bit, and I've jumped around a lot. So if anyone does have any questions.
I don't think there's any questions in the chat box, Sibby, but perhaps there will be after I share one of our final Slidos, which is quite strongly related to your talk. So this is so we are running a little over, and apologies for those of you that have had to leave or need to go. If you can stick around, then great. So if you want to just join this Slido, same again, use your QR or go to the website. So the question is, do you have or think you might have wildlife species on campus that could be impacted by rodenticides or rat bait? Do you have or think you might have wildlife species that could be impacted by rodenticides?
And the reason I asked for this question to be asked is, knowing this answer gives you some leverage. You might have protected species, which are actually protected by law, and therefore if they might be affected by rodenticides, that gives you slight leverage. But also, it's always best to talk to people with concrete examples of what you have on your site and why you're worried. So it helps the conversation.
Thanks, Libby. I've just had a notification on mine to say that my screen isn't sharing.
I can see the slide.
You can, okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know why then. So we've had a few responses on there, so thank you. So just give you 1 minute, well, less than a minute, 10 seconds we'll give you to place your votes. Nice to see. Well, I don't know about nice, but interesting to see that everybody's voted the same way there. So just 5 more seconds to place your vote there.
Oh, so your screen's frozen on here because I can't see anyone responding. It still shows 0 response. So the screen you're sharing was still there at 13. Okay. Okay, yeah, that might have been what's going on. So I think we've got everybody's polls in there, so that's been quite useful. Thank you. Right. Okay, and then we've got a final question on the poll just to wrap things up. Hopefully that's just popped up on your phone or on your tab. And it is again in relation a little bit to the points that Sibby's raised, also the points that both Elizabeth's and Kevin have raised, and it's really about how how you can make contact with the right people to help. And we're talking, what methods could you use? But we're also talking about the kind of approach that you might use. And I think Sibby's point was really interesting, that, you don't want to, we want you to feel confident to have these conversations, but at the same time, we don't want to be going in there all guns blazing winding anybody up, really. Because as Sibby says, it could just shut the conversation down. So I suppose this question is a little bit of both. How could we do that? What methods could we use to make contact with the right people? Whether that's emails, it could be going along to a staff meeting or something similar. And the answer to this will be different depending on where you are, and also the kind of approach that you might take, just in a few words. So we've got a few answers on this one.
A few people have had to leave, so we might not get quite as many votes for this final poll. I can see some people typing, so just give yourselves a minute. And yeah, Siri, what would your, while people are typing, what would your recommendation be?
So my recommendation would be friendly persistence. And the reason I say that is because it's important to be proactive and engage and, you know, be passionate about what we're trying to get across, you know, to try and help animals, basically. Sometimes, though, it can take a while, especially, well, I'm only using my university as an example. I imagine it's the same for quite a few others, where different people have different workloads. They may not get back to you, and it may not be intentional. They just, you know, it takes time. So friendly persistence, even like, I don't mind being chased. So even once a month, oh, by the way, did you see that email I sent? And, you know, do you know? And even if it's a case of, if it's somebody who isn't, for example, who doesn't know, who, you know, it's not to do with their role, they may not be the contract manager. If you're nice and persistent enough, but in a friendly way, they may like, right, you know what, I'm going to find out who it is, because rather than having them email me, I'm going to let them email somebody else. And that can work wonders. It's just that friendliness, and they may know, and then you can find out. But
well, let's see what everybody else has to say. So obviously this is a bit of a mixed question. So we've got a lot of people on there saying they would use emails. Absolutely. I'd be interested to know if you know where to even look for the right sort of contacts to make. I suppose looking on, usually universities and colleges have sustainability pages. If it's a smaller college, perhaps you wouldn't, but an estates page. So having a look on your own website to find the right details there. But email is always going to be a good one. And we do have email signature logos with the Hedgehog Friendly Campus logo on, and so perhaps it would help for that staff member or student, whoever you're contacting, to relate who you are to the program that's being run. So yeah, that's the email on there. Nice and friendly, relevant, keeping it relevant. Yeah, in person's a good option. You know, if you're doing things in person on campus now, going along to perhaps to meetings, to estates meetings, if they'll have you, perhaps have a slot for the Hedgehog Friendly Campus team. Go green events, that's a good point. So events is another good chance to make those connections and start to make contact with the right people. So yeah, it's really interesting to see the range of different responses there. And again, we will share these with you because we're running over time. I'll just leave that one there. So right, because we're going to wrap things up now, and a few of you have had to leave. Remember, we do have this recording to share with you afterwards. Just want to know how you're feeling. So just to get an understanding of how you're feeling, how confident you're feeling about approaching these discussions. So these discussions with staff, students, whoever that might be. 1 being not confident at all, you really don't know what you're doing. 5 being super confident, you know exactly what you're doing and you're going to go away and start making a plan to have these conversations and affect those changes. So 1 being low, 5 being high. So how are you feeling about approaching these discussions about rodenticides after today? And I'll just give you about 10 seconds to place your vote for this one. So I know we've gone a bit over on time, and apologies for that.
Joe, you know that case study that I did, which I based the presentation on, that can also be circulated, couldn't it?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we've got a few resources to follow up with actually after this. And so keep an eye on your emails if you registered via Eventbrite, and then we will send you a message out. If you don't receive a message from us, then drop us an email and request it, because it may be that you've not signed up with the relevant email address. So we'll leave that there. Great to see. We've got a bit of a mixed bag. Some feeling a bit confident, some feeling some feeling a little confident. Hopefully, you know, if you've got some time to have these discussions with your team, perhaps you can put a bit of a plan into place. I'm sure, although perhaps they can let us know in the chat box, that all of the speakers today would be more than happy for you to contact them to ask for some advice about how they've approached this situation at their campus. And there's always Kevin for very specific advice on rat and rodent control. So if that's all right with the speakers, perhaps we can share your contact details after the session.
Not a problem. And I just realized, actually, if any of the universities attending are members of the EAUC, which is the Environmental Association of Universities and Colleges, there is a subgroup on biodiversity. So some of your unis may be members and you may not know. And if they are, that's another person to contact to start conversations.
Thanks, Ivy. So just to wrap things up then, with a few upcoming opportunities from Hedgehog Friendly Campus. If you found today interesting, we do have a hedgehog ecology and land management for practitioners workshop coming up on Friday the 5th of August. This is an online event on Teams, and it's aimed at grounds maintenance and gardeners teams. So get in touch if your grounds team is interested in getting involved in that. Our contacts at the bottom there. We've got a hedgehog survey workshop online coming up on this Friday the 22nd at 1 o'clock. Again, if you want to book onto that to learn a little bit more about how to survey for hedgehogs and other small mammals on your campus, then get in touch. And just a little reminder, it's in your toolkits, and we'll be sending out lots of comms about it coming up, about the Hog Friendly Litter Pick Challenge that starts on the 19th of September and runs until the end of November. So some of you may have taken part in this in previous years, and we are running it again. So some upcoming opportunities for you there. A big thank you to all of the speakers today. So thank you, Kevin, the Elizabeths, and Civi as well. Thank you very much for the go ahead to share your contact details. I found that really interesting, and I think that we've also got, certainly once I've put it all together, we've got some good advice and stepping stones for those of you that want to start taking these conversations forwards. So remember, we're in it for the hedgehogs, we're in it for the wildlife. We want to make sure that they can survive and thrive and not have a million hazards to face when they're on our campus, especially because we're trying to encourage them on. And this is just one of the aspects of that. So I hope that you found this useful. Just a final thank you to the Hedgehog Society for the funding for the programme. If any of you have follow-up questions or would like to send us any information, our details just at the bottom of the screen there. So I'm going to wrap things up and stop the recording, and thank you ever so much for coming. You can go chill out, have a nice ice bath, go and get some lunch, and yeah, thank you very much for coming.